And finally, Area 19, the Spire of Iriolarthas. So as promised, I was going to go over how your players can go ahead and approach doing the Rite of the Arcane Octad. The thing is you have to, once again, consider, does one person in the party have to do it and then the entire party can go through? Or does every single person in the party have to do it? As previously mentioned, there's certain areas where if every single person has to do it, it is going to be tough. A perfect example being holding the wand crafted from the nether oak over your heart. That can be a pain because trying to get the wand can be a big deal. You know, if you don't have people that are stealthy and, you know, you don't have people that can actually talk too well, then it can be certainly a pain if everyone's got to go in there and get it, or, you know, if one person goes in and gets multiple of them, whatever. But step one is just basically get a piece of oak and go ahead and whittle it down. Anybody would be able to do that. That would require no ability check at all. You could go ahead and just take a stick and just have a crude stick and say that's your wand. The second one, though, that's a little bit tougher. Summon a flame in the palm of your hand. That one is definitely tougher for some people because, of course, you're going to have some spellcasters that could possibly do that, whether they have Sacred Flame, Firebolt, Produce Flame. These spells would probably work just fine, but unfortunately, not everyone's a spellcaster, and thus it would be impossible for some people to do that. Well, they got to get creative. As per listed here, it states that, for example, an adventurer could light a handful of lamp oil to summon a flame, taking 1 point of damage in the process. You know, if your players get creative with it, then totally run it. If your players sit here throughout this entire thing and come up with something clever, that's awesome. Reward that. But if you don't have players that are too creative, and if you don't want to waste their time, and if you just want to go ahead and get along with the adventure, then go ahead and just make it so that, you know, all these solutions are absolutely no issue. The third, speak a secret about yourself aloud. And, you know, the thing is, it probably alludes to the fact that you should be speaking the secret of, you know, this campaign's secrets. But I'm willing to bet a lot of people are going to interpret it as you can just go ahead and say whatever secret you want. You know, oh, this one time at band camp I did da-da-da. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of players that say that. You know, I would go ahead and run that as well because if your players have had secrets this entire campaign and it's never come up for any reason at all, then I feel like revealing it here is kind of a waste, really. I mean, what do you really get out of it? Is there any shock value? I think a lot of the secrets that came with this book were more intended to come up during the course of adventures in the 10 towns and over the course of adventuring elsewhere. Having it just revealed right here just to go ahead and make their way into a room kind of gets rid of what I believe the secrets were meant to be. 4, compel another to share a secret with you. And once again, this is leading into that whole, if you have everyone have to do this, then you get to sit around and do a lot of secret sharing, right? You have person A speak a secret out loud, and then person A has to say, hey, person B, tell me a secret. And then person B has to not only tell their secret out loud, but then has to ask someone else to. That is very time consuming. It kind of just should lead into itself of, you have your party go ahead and just talk to each other and say, okay, you know, I'm going to speak a secret about myself loud. Go. Now you go. Now you go. And then hopefully it goes around in a ring really quickly. 5, quench the flame in ice. And what this is telling me is that after you summon the flame in the palm of your hand, you have to keep it there. Which is funny because for those people that aren't magical, they have a flame in the palm of their hand and they have to immediately go ahead and speak a secret out loud and convince someone else to say a secret, all the meanwhile their hand is burning. I think that's pretty hilarious. Like, come on, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. 6, mask your appearance. So hopefully your players can get something here. Hopefully they just put on a robe and, you know, put the hood over them. Hopefully they have a mask that they found somewhere. Hopefully, you know, maybe someone's got illusion spells that they can go ahead and cover themselves up with. You know, that should be fairly easy to solve. Step 7, though, this one's a bit tougher. Draw a circle on the ground using the ashes of a corpse. So there's not too many corpses that are around this place. There is several, and if they actually explored around, they would definitely find a few. Specifically, the one that they would have had to find would be the necromancer's corpse in the necromancer tower. So if over the course of their adventures they haven't found too many corpses, they know at least the location of one. And they could go ahead and go over to this corpse and be like, hey, sorry, man, and go ahead and start burning it. And, you know, that is kind of macabre, having to go ahead and find a corpse, burn it to ashes, and then go ahead and pick it up and start spreading it around the place. But it wouldn't be too difficult if they actually learn that they need to do this. Then they'll be on the lookout for corpses. And mind you, it doesn't have to be a humanoid corpse. It just simply says of a corpse. So there's plenty of monsters around here, and you could always consider any dead creature a corpse, and they could go ahead and burn it. So if they've come across any of these monsters around here, that wouldn't be too bad of an issue. Step 8, stand inside the circle and consume poison. So the thing with this one is poison isn't usually a regular commodity. People don't usually have it. And most important of all, people probably wouldn't want to drink poison just to get inside this room, especially if they've only got like deadly poison on their hand. So I know for a fact a lot of people are going to try and get creative with this one here. They're going to try and go ahead and say, I'm going to go ahead and put the water on the ground and it's poisonous to me. Or hopefully you have some players in your party that have the protection from poison spell and maybe do that. That would certainly help out a lot. There is a bevy of ways this one can be handled. You can sit there and truly consider, what is poison really? Are we just talking about D&D mechanical poison? Or are we talking about what would be more bodily harm to you? You have to go ahead and sit there and consider what it is. I personally wouldn't try and spend too much time on these steps because I think the adventure should be had exploring around the place, not trying to, you know, draw up the line of what poison is or not. Once your players have completed these steps, whether it be one person that did it and allows it to go through, all of your players did it and they can go through, or maybe you could have a fun combo of the whole party has to complete these steps, but not each individual person has to complete a step, meaning that like player 1 could go ahead and do steps 1 and 2, and then player 2 can go ahead and do steps 3 and 4, etc., etc. I think that'd be a fun team building exercise. But mind you, the funny thing about this whole debacle here is the whole compelling another to share a secret and speaking a secret about yourself aloud. Under normal circumstances, this should be able to be done no problem at all. But the thing is that more likely than not, by the time they get to this area, the Arcane Blight is going to start gripping into a lot of people. And the Arcane Blight gives everyone the flaw, I don't trust anyone. So depending on how your players roleplay out that flaw and how much you enforce it, that could be detrimental. In fact, it could be to the point where if your players are playing this up hardcore and they don't trust anyone, there's no reason they would share a secret about themselves aloud. And you have to sit there and consider, is the roleplay so important to the game that you would go ahead and grind this adventure down to a halt as they try and overcome the Arcane Blight? Or is it okay that they don't trust anyone, but they're willing to do something to go ahead and push the game along? You are, of course, once again, going to have to be the arbiter of these rules. I'll go ahead and tell you, though, maybe just have this flaw of I don't trust anyone be more along the lines of I'm not willing to do things under normal circumstances, but this is not normal circumstances. Your players came here for a reason, and they know for a fact there's going to be some good swag up in the Spire of Iriolarthas, so maybe that is enough to overcome this flaw just for a brief moment and say, hey, I don't trust you. I'm going to go ahead and tell you a secret, and you have to tell me a secret, but I don't trust you. Once your players have overcome this, they can go ahead and step inside where they will be levitated and be transported all the way to the Spire itself. And what's nice about this Spire is that it does in fact come with a minimap. So let's go ahead and start diving into that, shall we? In Area A, we have the Spire of Iriolarthas. It's here where we get some brief information about the location here, that the place is got a shimmering force field, and it's a 1,200 foot tall obsidian citadel, which rises and dwarfs everything nearby, and creatures can't pass through it. You can't teleport in here. The only way of getting in here is using the Rite of the Arcane Octad, so there is no cheating. And we also get this very important information. This is the Demi-Lich's lair. So, Demi-Liches are insanely powerful. I'll go ahead and cover this for just a brief moment. Demi-Liches are CR 18 because they are incredibly strong. They've only got 80 hit points, whatever, right? You know, 80 hit points, that's nothing. But they have 20 AC, so they're a little bit harder to hit. But the thing is that they fly around, so your melee people are going to be worthless. The Demi-Lich isn't going to be stupid. The Demi-Lich isn't going to be floating right there base level. The melee people are never going to get hits in. And most important of all, this creature has a DC 15 save or drop to 0. And that is theoretically a TPK in a single round because everyone drops to 0 and then the Demi-Lich starts zapping people on the ground, and that's that, end of story. This creature is already deadly enough as is, just purely running it normally. But add into the fact that, of course, it's got its legendary actions, but most important of all, it's got its layer actions. These layer actions are actually pretty gross. The tomb trembles violently for a moment. Each creature on the floor must succeed on a DC 19 dexterity saving throw or be knocked prone. That's a pretty big deal because if the Demi-Lich has some allies, then the allies can go ahead and just start attacking people that are prone on the ground. The Demi-Lich targets one creature that it can see within 60 feet. Anti-magic field fills the space of the target, moving it until initiative count 20 on the next turn. If you have a spellcaster that can't cast spells, they're gonna cry. That is kind of the whole thing about spellcasters. And once again, the Demi-Lich isn't gonna care at all about any of the melee people, so it's just simply floating up, 20 feet ahead, 30 feet ahead, and then your wizard of the party just gets nothing. That's a huge deal. And lastly, the Demi-Lich targets any number of creatures it can see within 30 feet. No target can regain hit points until initiative count 20 on the next round. If the Lich is pumping out damage and, it starts off with a scream, half the party goes down, and it does this layer action, then all those people who are down to 0 can't regain hit points. Per the rules, that means even if they roll a nat 20, they wouldn't even be able to come back up. That's huge. Now, it is nice, of course, is that it does not give the layer traits to Iriolarthas and all of his minions, so you don't have to worry about that. But basically, the picture I'm trying to paint for you is the fact that this Demi-Lich is disgusting, and we'll be getting to him when we get to that area. But, man, is a 9th or 10th level party going to cry when they finally go up against a Demi-Lich. Ceilings located in this area are 30 feet high in rooms and 10 feet high in corridors. These people apparently had some balling chandelier or something crazy in their rooms, right? If rooms are that luxurious and grand. Doors are made from enchanted oak fitted with adamantine locks and hinges. Pretty neat. And lastly, lighting. The interior of the spire is brightly lit by continual flames and cast in the wall sconces. You don't have to worry about the darkness in here. This place is perfectly well lit. In Area A, we have the main entrance. Your players go ahead and start walking through here, and they'll see a door at the end of the corridor. But what's really interesting is when they finally make their way to the door, they'll see that there's a window to the side. And looking through is a Hypnosmaiden. The Hypnosmaiden is going to go ahead and suggest, literally using the suggestion spell, that people go away. But of course, this could be just a formality that says that, people shouldn't be coming here. What if your players look like they are Netherese, or if they start speaking in Netherese? I would say that the Magen probably would go ahead and let them in because, hey, there's a party going on, and maybe the players were invited to it, and it just doesn't know. So your players have crawled around this dead city for so long after going through the Caves of Hunger and the Ragged Snow, and they probably have these expectations of this dead necropolis and, death and despair and destruction all around. But once they make their way into Area B, the Ballroom, they step inside and they see there's a party going on. This is dope. As soon as they walk inside, they see that there's dozens of people flittering around the place, just having a good time. And obviously this is, totally looks like a trap to them. Mind you, it isn't a trap. There is just a fun illusion party going on here. Many of these things are in fact illusions. However, there is some denizens of the Netherese Empire that still reside in here. And they are lived for so long because they have put their brains in jars. And they are just having a grand old time. Mind you, they don't look like brains in jars. They are part of the illusion as well. They look like, Netherese people. And they're just going around just having a fun time because it's the end of the world. You might as well party, right? Now, your players might go ahead and get spooked by this and try and dispel magic all around if they think something's up, or they might start attacking, or they might start going crazy. And if they go ahead and try and disrupt the world around them in a violent nature, then the illusion will probably dispel itself or reveal itself to be fake. And the brains in jars are going to go ahead and attack. And, that makes sense, right? If your players just walk up and they start blasting, then of course there's going to be retaliation. But there is the far more fun approach where if your players come up here, they can start joining the ball. They could just go ahead and start interacting with the guests. They can go ahead and partake in the food and drink, and they can start talking to people and learn some fun stuff. That is awesome. My party obviously believed that something was not right here, but they weren't getting attacked and they weren't getting poisoned, so they went along with it. And that was really awesome because I definitely played up the fact that these people don't know what's going on in the outside world. They're just having a fun time in here. They go ahead and talk about Netherese life like it's still going on, and they don't know any better. And if anybody tries to disrupt that flow, then they just go ahead and say, oh, you're boring, and that individual Netherese person goes ahead and walks away. If you play up the innocence of this area and don't lean into it like it's some creepy stuff going on here, then your players hopefully won't go ahead and start being murder hobos. If your players go ahead and explore around a bit, they can go ahead and explore the left side of the tower, in which case they'll find Area C, the council chambers. In these chambers, they will find there are these single tables and cabinets filled with ruined parchment and scrolls. And what's really cool here is they can find an unfinished letter that details the acquisition of an artifact dating back to the Empire of Astoria. The writer notes that it has been moved into the Citadel's Stasis Chamber for further study. So this is, of course, definitely alluding to the Spindle, the reason why this city crashed in the first place. And, this rewards your players by exploring around a bit and letting them know that there's some cool artifact upstairs, potentially. They might not know what it is, but they know at least there's something cool upstairs. In Area D, we have the Guard Passage. It's here where if your players go ahead and try looking behind the scenes, then they are going to get approached by that same Hypnosmaiden that was essentially the bouncer to this party. If your players already dealt with this Hypnosmaiden in a combat sense, or if they try and pose themselves off as someone else, they can go ahead and explore around a bit, and I definitely think that the next area is definitely worth exploring. For some mechanics on dealing with this Hypnosmaiden, I'd probably go ahead and say make it a DC 15 persuasion check, and this is made with disadvantage if they are not wearing Netherese clothing. Definitely something reasonable and something that your players could totally manage. In Area E, we have the Liquification Chamber. Yes, the Liquification Chamber. The liquefaction is in regards of your body, because if you arrive here, you can interact with a woman named Veneranda. And Veneranda is a brain in a jar, and this brain in a jar is attached to a helmed horror. And what's really dope is Veneranda, if your players come in here and start talking to her, she will offer your players the privilege of eternal life at the low cost of eschewing your body. So unlike all the other brains in jars that are floating around here, she actually knows what's going on. She knows that the city has been destroyed for quite some time, and she knows that things are not all right in the world. If the players come in and start actually talking, then she can go ahead and say, hey, there's a way we can go ahead and fix everything. If we get Iriolarthas' Staff of Power, we can go down there to that obelisk that we can see right down there and change the world. So if she drops this huge bombshell on your players, the fact that, oh yeah, we can reverse time here, that is tremendous. Your players are going to be like, oh, time travel, oh man, we can reverse a ton of things. We could reverse time so the Netherese don't crash. Or probably what's going to happen with most groups are, they're probably going to think to themselves, hey, we could just go ahead and reverse time before Real does all of her crazy shenanigans and, make sure that she doesn't rise to power. I think that's probably what most people are going to think about. So Veneranda is going to go ahead and suggest that your players go ahead and steal the Staff of Power upstairs, and once then they can reconvene and head down and turn back time. She doesn't want to go up there because she knows it's dangerous. And what's really weird is it states that she is cold and calculating, but at the same time, the final sentence here states, if the characters are unwilling to help Veneranda achieve her goal, they quickly outlive their usefulness and she tries to destroy them. If she was cold and calculating, she wouldn't be stupid and throw herself away against the party. She probably looks at the party and realizes that, oh, hey, anywhere between 3 to, 8 people in a party, I'm not going to go ahead and just attack them. That doesn't make any sense. So I wouldn't have her throw herself away against the party if they didn't want to help. Because I'm willing to bet if your players actually don't even intend on helping, she still could take advantage of the situation anyway, because your players go ahead upstairs anyway to go ahead and take the Staff of Power, and maybe at some point down the line, whoever has it gets killed, and she can go ahead and try and snatch it. But here's the thing. If your players are talking to Veneranda, then she can casually slip throughout this entire exchange. Oh, hey, I've got a machine here. If you want to live forever, I could go ahead and put your brain in a jar. And that would be awesome. I tried pushing this so hard onto my players, but none of them were willing to take it. But I'm willing to bet there's going to be a decent amount of people out there that will be willing to take it. And if you go ahead and explain the situation of, okay, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to magically transplant your brain into a jar and your body is just going to be done for, there might be some people that'll go for it for sure. If any of your players take the stats of a brain in a jar, then they'll be in for a great time, because brain in jars get a chill touch cantrip for free. They get the Mind Blast effect for free, which is basically a weaker version of the Mind Flayer's Mind Blast. But it's still pretty cool. Psychic damage and a chance to stun people. And a whole bunch of fun spells here. And of course, the fact that you will have magical resistance and you will have the unusual nature. But what's funny is, for all the good side that you get for all this stuff, all these fun spellcasting nature and all that fun jazz, the thing that I think a lot of people will be most annoyed about is the hover speed. So brain in jars are relatively slow. They only have a 10-foot hover speed. That's it. So that means they wouldn't be able to keep up with the party. So I know for a fact that if people start asking, oh, hey, if I get into a brain in jar, can I be in a suit of armor like you? I would go ahead and not allow your players to be a brain in a jar with a helmed horror body. But maybe you go ahead and say that they can get a crappy suit of armor that has, basically terrible physical stats. And I think that would be perfectly fair. Mind you, this is near the end of the campaign, so you shouldn't be too worried about things such as permanency if you don't plan on running these characters anymore. You should go ahead and just let them do whatever they want. If your player says, hey, I don't want to be a body anymore, I want to be a brain in a jar and live forever, then go ahead and let them. In Area F, we have the staff storage. This is basically, instead of it being a coat storage, apparently the Netherese would go ahead and hand off their staffs to the Magen, and the Magen would go ahead and put it in a room somewhere. And here we get detailed out 6 different staffs. Each of them is unique, but the thing that sucks is, while they're all flavorful, only one of them has any type of mechanical benefit. The last one is made of chartalin, which means you will go crazy if you hold it. But while holding the staff, you are immune to the frightened and poisoned conditions, which is pretty freaking good, honestly, but at the low cost of going insane while holding it. I would go ahead and say at this stage in the game, if you have some spellcasters, maybe go ahead and give the other ones the same kind of benefits. Maybe give each staff one minor condition immunity. Maybe just give them a little something mechanical here, because the flavor's great, but the mechanics need to go alongside it. As your players meander through the ballroom here, they'll be able to step up and look to the side, and they'll see Area G, the den. This den is once again filled with people that seem to be partying, and what you'll be able to see here is that there is a chest of some kind that is generating some music, and it's sat at a round table. This is an abracadabras. What is an abracadabras? An abracadabras is actually a very powerful item. This thing is a chest with 20 charges, and a creature can use an action to touch the closed lid of the chest and expend one of the chest charges while naming one or more non-magical objects, such as raw materials, foodstuff, and liquids worth 1 GP or less. The named objects appear, and lo and behold, they can be consumed with a span of 24 hours. So that's a pretty powerful object. You can go ahead and eat all you want all day and not have to worry. This is essentially a different version of the alchemy jug. The alchemy jug definitely has some exploits in it in regards of being able to generate stuff that would earn you gold, but the abracadabras would just be able to straight up feed your whole party, and that'd be cool. In Area H, we have the members bar, and this is basically a exclusive club here, and you should go ahead and play it up as such. The ballroom is full of Netherese people that look fancy, But when they make their way in here, you should go ahead and say that these people look even more fancy. They're way more well dressed and they look way more lavish. What is awesome to be found in here is the fact that there is some wine, some 2,000-year-old wine. And for all of the wine connoisseurs, that would be tremendous because, lo and behold, your players can find a whopping dozen bottles, and each of these bottles, because they're so intricate, so well preserved, they're preserved specifically with magic, these things are worth 50 GP each. Meaning that if your party grabs the whole kit and caboodle, you're gonna be living like kings. Or you could say screw the gold and just have wine that is never gonna be brewed ever again. That's something you whip out at a party. Oh yeah, this wine we found in a Netherese ruin. Ah, so fancy. In Area I, we have the Force Bridge. Your players, after making their way through the ball, they'll be able to see that the only way to go upstairs, essentially, is past here. The only issue is, they'll come up to this place and they'll see that there's a room on the other side of a gap. They don't see the bridge. You know, that's a total Indiana Jones move right there of they look down and they're like, ooh, I don't want to fall hundreds of feet, screw that. So if you have literally no indication at all whatsoever that there is an invisible bridge here, your players are probably going to start trying to get creative here. They either start casting fly or they start trying to use grappling hooks, or they, think about jumping or something, crazy, right? So if your players are spending a little too much time trying to figure out how to cross this bridge, then go ahead and say at some point there's some rubble in the middle of this area and it's sitting perfectly still in the middle of the floor. Hopefully, if your players see this, they will say, hey, maybe we should test that out, and start prodding and touching in front of them, and they can figure out, oh, hey, there is just an invisible bridge right here. In Area J, we have the Chamber of Sorcery. It's once your players arrive in here, they'll be able to look around and see that they can go ahead and make their way up. The thing is, though, is as they make their way in here, a figure is going to appear in front of them. A crystallized, basically hologram, a la Jarvis, essentially. This entity is Everlast. Iriolarthas created Everlast as a way to help assist him and just have a person around the area, right? Everlast is here to help out with anything, and he's basically just this weird AI construct that can move all around the Spire and help anybody anywhere at any time. Everlast, because he has no companions to talk to at all, is rather bored and is going to latch onto the players immediately. However, it has standing orders from Iriolarthas. It must assist in the city's restoration, but at the same time it cannot reveal any of these secrets to outsiders. So, your players walking in here, they're probably going to look like outsiders. In which case, if they are, then sadly, Everlast is not going to reveal any secrets about the city. But if your players came here under the guise of being Netherese and are keeping up this ruse rather well, then Everlast has no reason to believe otherwise and will go ahead and reveal whatever it needs in order to assist in the city's restoration. So your players could have heard that using the Staff of Iriolarthas on the obelisk outside, it could help amend the city. Everlast is, however, going to object to this and say, that might be unwise, for the obelisk was damaged in the crash. Iriolarthas was unable to repair it. And that is going to get your players a second guessing here of, ooh, we just heard about this time travel thing, but maybe that might not pan out. Depending on how you want your campaign to end, how you want to structure it, telling them this exact thing might put them off of something that you kind of want to see happen. But, if you are running this more open and wanting to see how your players interact with the world around them, then telling them this might, still allow them to try it out anyway. Now, how Everlast projects himself around the tower is that there are these crystals embedded in the niches in the walls here. These things are only AC of 8, hit points of 3, immunity to poison psychic. If half of these are damaged, then Everlast disappears. So sad. Now, in order for your players to make their way up, however, they need to succeed on a DC 20 perception check, and they will see that 30 feet up on the ceiling, there is a secret hatch. Simply knocking on the hatch is enough to cause it to open, and they will be able to make their way inside. Now, it doesn't state anywhere if there is like a ladder or a rope or a staircase or whatever with this secret hatch. I would go ahead and say that there's like a cool spiral staircase because, that would be a pain if your players had to go ahead and somehow climb 30 feet up in the middle of nowhere, right? Just give them something to work with. Or, hey, maybe just go ahead and say that as soon as your players step right underneath the hatch, they teleport up. I think that'd be pretty neat. In Area 19, we have the Dome. As your players make their way up here, they'll look around and see that there is a door. However, the door is being guarded by 2 living blades of disaster. So, hardcore veterans of D&D, specifically people that play 3rd edition, would know that black blades of disaster are terrifying. Thankfully, though, blades of disaster have been nerfed to some degree because back then magic was a lot more powerful. These blades do a decent amount of damage. They do 4d12 points of damage on a hit. But what's interesting is if they roll an 18, 19, or 20, they crit, and that crit deals an additional 12d12 points of force damage. So, yeah, if these things crit, you're going to be in for a bad time. And these creatures actually have a very unique trait, Preemptive Strike. The living spell makes a melee attack against a creature that starts its turn within 5 feet of the living spell. So they only get 1 attack on their turn, but traditionally they are going to get 2 attacks in a round. They do crit on an 18, 19, or 20, so if you're giving them 2 attacks a round, there's a decent chance that at some point, if a fight lasts for too long, they are going to crit. But mind you, these blades aren't going to immediately go ahead and attack the party. What are they doing here? These blades are simply guarding the door. So once your players step a little too close to the door, the blades are going to rush forward and attack whoever is nearby. After that fight is wrapped up, then your players can go ahead and walk up to the door. But unfortunately for them, they walk up to the door and they realize that there is a wall of force in front of them. So how do your players navigate around this wall of force? Well, under normal circumstances, it looks like this would be theoretically impenetrable. But thankfully, due to time, the green crystal along the wall, which is the source of this wall of force, has been a little bit weakened. And what it states here is that tremendously loud noises, such as those made by Thunderwave or Horn of Blasting, would dislodge it for 1d6 rounds and allow for people to make their way inside. Here's the problem. Not everyone's got spells, not everyone's got Thunderwave, not everyone's got a Horn of Blasting. And if your players have literally no spells at all whatsoever that can create a tremendously loud noise, then you're going to have to come up with something that will allow them to go ahead and make their way inside. Now, it states that a tremendously loud noise will cause the wall of force to be suppressed for 1d6 rounds. Maybe you go ahead and say that if someone screams at the top of their lungs and you make them make some type of Constitution saving throw or something of that nature, then maybe the wall of force goes down for just even a single round, in which case that'll hopefully be enough for someone to make their way through the wall of force and hit the green crystal. The green crystal needs to be pried out or destroyed, and thankfully this is a pretty easy job here. It only has an AC of 13, and it only has 4 hit points, and it's immune to, of course, poison and psychic damage. So if the loud noise is created and someone goes ahead and shoots this thing or runs up and yanks it out, then thankfully the wall of force will be over and your players can make their way inside. Now, making your way inside to Area I, the testing chamber, is one of the biggest FUs in the campaign so far. As soon as your players take their very first step into this area, they will be hit by a Flesh to Stone spell. Any creature that walks into the area right here, right after the door, is immediately hit by a DC 17 Flesh to Stone spell, and it's as simple as that. Your players open up a door and say, "Oh boy," step inside, and bam, just like that, the first person that walks through gets hit. The second person that walks through that gets hit, and the third person that walks through gets hit as well. However, after the third time it triggers, the spell vanishes. So Flesh to Stone spell is pretty simple. If you succeed on the save, then congratulations, nothing bad happens to you. But if you fail, then you begin the process of petrification. Now from then on, at the end of each of your turns, you must make a Constitution saving throw. If you succeed, congratulations. If you fail, that sucks. You have to succeed 3 times in order to overcome the petrification. If you fail 3 times, however, then you are petrified, and you are permanently petrified, you turn to stone. That's that, end of story. Now, a DC 17 Constitution saving throw is pretty freaking tough for a lot of people, So unfortunately, on average, this would be just a sort of dead character. That really sucks, but fortunately, some people can do this okay, and even if you do get petrified, they are at the stage where greater restoration is a possibility in the party, so there is always that to consider. But it's not really the spell that's the issue, it's more the trap. It's the fact that your players make their way through here, they're basically like right near the finish line of this campaign, and then all of a sudden they just trigger a flesh to stone trap. That's kind of bogus in my opinion. That's a little bit hardcore, that's definitely old school. If you have characters that you actually like, then this sucks. But if you're running a meat grinder, then go ahead and keep it. In meat grinder mode, this thing is great. If you don't like the idea of a trap outright killing all of your characters, then go ahead and make this spell something else. Maybe something more damagey. Maybe make it a phantasmal killer and cause them to hallucinate and take psychic damage. Maybe just have this be a classic glyph that causes a fireball to explode out because, fireballs are classic and a ton of fun, and they usually don't outright kill people. You can definitely throw in a lot of those fun spells and it'll be just fine. It really just depends on the tempo of your campaign. After your players make their way out of that terrible trap, they will find themselves standing in front of 8 doors, and an inscription will read, "Speak thy master's name and enter." So this is a little bit cryptic if they don't know all that's going on here. But if your players explored around the city of Ythryn enough, they would actually know the names of the wizards that were in charge of all of these schools of magic. If they do know this, then they can go ahead and simply go up to the door. Each door, mind you, has a symbol located on it that depicts whatever school of magic it is. They could simply go up to any one of these doors and speak the master's name. And if they do that, problem solved. They simply open the door and they can go through no problem. But it's very likely that your players think that this might be some sort of a trap, or they don't know the names of the masters, in which case they will open up the door and see a perpetual darkness. And the only thing that would allow anybody to see inside of this darkness would be something that allows you to see in magical darkness, such as Devil Sight. Each time a creature steps through the door without speaking the correct name, a barbed devil appears in the dark corridor and begins to wall up on the person because they can see in the darkness, meaning that your player would have disadvantage on attack rolls and everything else, and the creature would have advantage against them because that's what happens when you're fighting creatures that can't see. It states that these devils can leave the darkness to pursue their foes, but depending on how you want to run it, it probably wouldn't make sense for the devil to leave the darkness, because presumably it would be doing pretty well in the darkness, and if it ran out of the darkness, it would probably just get ganked by the party, especially because if it left the safety of a corridor with walls and now went out into the middle of the open, it started getting beat up on. But hey, go ahead and play it however you desire. It also states that these devils only spawn once per door, meaning that if your players go through one door and beat up on the devil there, they can go ahead and open it again, and no devil will be spawned. In which case, they really only needed to kill one creature in order to make their way through. If you have a group that's very tentative, if you have a group that's trying to be methodical about this, they could go ahead and try open up every door, in which case they get into a ton of fights. And if they do that, then I guess joke's on them. I would go ahead and try and say, have someone be a little bit more pushing and a little bit more saying, hey, just go, just move forward. That's it. In Area M, we have the Chamber of the Ebon Star. Once they finally make their way through any of those doors, they can finally find themselves here. They'll see this awesome star field in the center of this room, and located to the south of it, there are 8 chairs, and each of them depicts a school of magic. If anybody studies this star field for a little too long, they'll realize something. There's something there that shouldn't be. At the end of the character's next long rest, they must make a DC 20 intelligence saving throw. On a failed save, the character gains the following flaw. I can't look at the sky because the Ebon Star might be looking back at me. And that is really scary, honestly. If you know the cosmos, if you know the stars, the alignment and all that, and you look at a star field and you see something that is just there that you know shouldn't exist, that would cause an existential crisis, if there is some alien entity out there and it's just simply floating there, this big dark star, that could have huge ramifications. That is kind of terrifying, really. Now, each of these chairs represents an arcane school, and what it states here is that 3 of these chairs need to be filled by people that can cast spells from said school. Now, what it's implying here is that only wizards or people that drank from the goblet all the way back in the Arcane College there would be able to fill out the roles for these chairs. Only issue is, of course, is the fact that not every group's got wizards, and even if you do have a wizard in the group, they could theoretically not be of any school because there's more and more subclasses going on, right? And of course, your players may have spent too much time doing other things after drinking those goblets and not have any of those benefits anymore. If that is the case, then I would just go ahead and eschew all of that because, you know, that'd suck having to come all the way here and discovering, oh, hey, we need to drink some of that goblet. Let's go ahead and head back and have to trek all the way back. But what a waste of time. You know, screw that. Just go ahead and let them sit down in a chair and allow them to activate the starfield to transform into a door. After these seats are properly taken, then the starfield will transform into a door, and this door will allow your players to head up to Iriolarthas' chamber. Now, of course, Iriolarthas doesn't have to go through this rigmarole because he doesn't have anything to sit in a chair with. He can just go ahead and float up to this thing and make it turn into the door that he walks through, easy peasy. Area N, the Stasis Chamber. In this Stasis Chamber, your players will look inside, and this is where we get the awesome art, by the way. They will see this. They'll see this broken object. They probably have no idea what it is upon looking at it. And it looks marvelous. It's this crystal with these weird arcane energies floating off of it, and it's just simply sat in a broken room. This is the item that was taken from the Sea of Moving Ice, and this is the item that basically wiped out Ythryn. So this thing, whatever it is immune to all damage, and it's unaffected by magic in existence today. It is presumed that magic was able to affect this thing all the way back a long, long time ago, but the Ythryn people were going around and trying to figure out what this thing did. Upon a routine inspection, presumably someone tried identifying this thing or affecting it with some other type of spell. But if this object is targeted by a spell of 5th level or higher, a magical EMP will explode out. And this is the reason why the city crashed. Because someone targeted this thing and the city just lost all of its power and crashed right down. Everybody died, end of story. So unfortunately, if your players recreate this same thing, then they're going to be in for a world of hurt because everything that's magical goes out. Everything. All magical items cease to be magical for the next 24 hours, and all spellcasters are immediately drained of any unexpended spell slots. But what's interesting though is it's clearly lost some of its ability here because living spells, constructs, and other magically created creatures are unaffected. And what's also very cute to note here is that the pulse of energy suppresses magical traps throughout the city and causes the floating chamber above the Skydock Spire to crash into the ground, pulverizing it and dealing 18d10 bludgeoning damage to any creature that's inside it. And why that might be relevant is because that is where Avarice is going to stay once she arrives here in the city of Ythryn. Now, do I suspect that a lot of groups are going to target this thing with a 5th level spell or higher? I don't think so. I don't know if there's that many curious people. I don't know if there's that many people that are willing to touch things that they don't know what they do. But of course, invariably, there will be some groups that do, in which case, lo and behold, the things are going to happen. And the thing you got to consider is, are your players at this point going to know what this thing is? If they do, if they look at this thing and realize that this is the reason why this Ythryn city crashed, they may not want to touch it. But if they don't know what it is, or if they are just genuinely curious people, then they can go ahead and start fiddling around with this thing. They're not going to be able to glean too much information out of this thing, sadly, and this thing can't be moved, and there's really not much you can do with it. And quite frankly, it's not that useful, and it's probably more than likely detrimental to your own party anyway. In Area O, we have the library, and it's here where your players can go ahead and search around and find a whole bunch of cool notes. This is where your players can go ahead and find the exposition to get to Iriolarthas' room by finding this piece of information that says, Master Iriolarthas opens the door to his study when 3 or more of his apprentices, or those empowered by the goblet of the House of the Arcane, are seated correctly in the chamber of the Ebon Star. So if they're looking around for Iriolarthas' room, this is very good information. But they are going to be way more interested in the other thing they find here. They will find 2 things of treasure in here. One being an adamantine key, which simply opens up the door to the balcony over here in Area P. But the real big thing here is the Scroll of the Comet. The Scroll of the Comet is the huge one here. By using an action to read the scroll, you cause the comet to fall from the sky, and you can target anywhere within 1 mile of you. You must be outdoors when you use the scroll, or nothing happens and the scroll is wasted. The comet creates a 50-foot deep, 500-foot radius crater on impact. Any creature in that radius must succeed on a DC 20 dexterity saving throw, or take 30 d10 points of force damage, or half as much on a success. All structures in the crater are destroyed, and all non-magical objects that aren't being worn or held. So this is one of the 3 major ways your players are going to deal with O'Reilly. The first being the Scroll of Comet, the second being the Scroll of the Tarrasque, and the third being the Obelisk. This thing is awesome. If you want this campaign to end where your players make an assault on O'Reilly's fortress, and it starts off by your players calling down a comet on top of her head, that's an awesome thing to do. I can only imagine how many great stories are going to come out of this, where your players wait until O'Reilly lands down with her rock, and they wait a few minutes and they're like, okay, go! And they go ahead and cast the spell. Now, for all the number nerds out there, you'll be able to discover that 30 d10 points of damage sounds really strong, and admittedly it is. It would probably kill most player characters at this point. But on average, it only does 165. I just did the math right there. And on average, it does 165 points of damage. That would not kill the rock outright. While it would knock out one of O'Reilly's forms, she simply has 2 more. But that is an awesome way to start off your attack against O'Reilly if the rock is heavily damaged, if Grimskull is blown to smithereens, and O'Reilly is already down one of her forms. Awesome stuff. Now, the other thing it states is the fact that this thing doesn't work inside. So that's immediately telling us that while you are located in the city, it is worthless. I personally disagree with that. I think that if your players want to go ahead and call down this comet onto this location, they should totally be allowed to do so. Maybe you do say that it takes a reduction in damage. Maybe you reduce it by maybe 5 or 10 d10 points of damage, but allow the crater to at least smack into the city to some degree as it plummets right through the ragged glacier. Allowing your players that creative freedom to at least call this thing in whenever they need it should be allowed. Mind you, of course, if they call it down on top of themselves, then they could be hurting themselves, but hey, sometimes that's the price you're willing to pay. This could be a fire mission danger close, where you're calling it down on top of yourself and trying to kill whatever is attacking you. In Area P, we have the High Court Balcony. Your players can simply open this thing up if they get the key from the library, in which case they will go ahead and see that this balcony overlooks the city. And what's cool here is that if your players stand here, then they are essentially getting hit by a thaumaturgy spell, and their voice is amplified 10 times louder than normal, so they can go ahead and make an epic speech to the whole city. And unfortunately for them, it's probably not going to come into effect unless you have that faction play going on where they know for a fact that there's a whole bunch of other people in this city right now, in which case your players can go like, hey, look at us, yay. After your players have sat down into their respective chairs, they can cause the Ebon Star Charger to transform into a door that lasts for 1 minute, and they can go ahead and step inside. In Area Q, we find Iriolarthas' study. And it's here where your players look around and they will be able to see 3 Nothics, Iriolarthas, and a strange floating ethereal thing. They're probably not going to know what it is, but you obviously are going to know it is a living demiplane. So living demiplanes are a little bit strange. They're a demiplane that has grown self-aware. And what's interesting is that things can go ahead and hide in them. And what's really cool about this living demiplane in particular is that there are several monsters located inside of it. If your players have not already encountered Iriolarthas and dealt with him, then they're going to find him here, and that's terrifying because Iriolarthas is probably going to go in for the kill. And the kill, he's pretty good at. If a fight breaks out here, then it's going to be, oh lord, it's going to be terrible. I will be making a separate video on dealing with the endgame bosses of this campaign. One, of course, being Iriolarthas, one being O'Reilly. And, you know, they are certainly each filled with a whole bunch of deadliness attached to them. And Iriolarthas, I think, actually, as written here, could be even more deadly than O'Real. But O'Real obviously has a lot more real-world applications versus Iriolarthas is just going to be sitting here forever. But needless to say, your players come here, and whether they're fighting Iriolarthas or they've already dealt with Iriolarthas and they just make their way here, then your players can go ahead and find a ton of goodies. Your players can finally find a lot of the exposition that they could sorely need around here. They could find all the information they need on the Ythryn Mythalar and how it can change the weather and how it can move around and stuff. They can find out that they can reverse time using the Staff of Power on the obelisk. They can find out that there are command words to turn on and turn off the Wall of Force that is located at the Spire. But in my opinion, most important of all is they can find the end game items here. They can find a decent amount of gold in items, but who cares about gold? They can find the Staff of Power, which is an insanely powerful item in that of itself. They can find the incantations of Iriolarthas, and they can find the Scroll of the Tarrasque. The incantations of Iriolarthas is, of course, Iriolarthas' spellbook, and it is insanely huge. This guy was a lich who lived for a decent amount of time, so he built up a pretty decent repertoire. He has spells that players would normally not have access to, such as Blade of Disaster and Create Magen. So if you have any wizards in the party, this is going to be a hands-down take. But if you don't have any wizard prospects ever, then unfortunately this thing is going to not see much use. They're probably just going to go ahead and let it collect dust somewhere, or they are going to just go ahead and sell it. The Staff of Power is an insanely powerful item. It is so big. It is one of the strongest items a spellcaster can ever have. But the funny thing is if you don't have a sorcerer, warlock, or wizard in the party, this thing cannot be attuned by, and thus cannot be used by anyone on the obelisk. So if you don't have a sorcerer, warlock, or wizard in the party, and they get this thing, then no one's going to be able to harness the power to use it and reverse time. That exact scenario happened in my campaign, and in fact one of my players actually multi-classed in order to use this thing. But there was a reason for him to multi-class, so it fit pretty well. But the biggest item here, the game-changing one, is the Scroll of the Tarrasque. Using an action to read the scroll caused the Tarrasque to appear in an unoccupied space that you can see within 1 mile of you. The Tarrasque disappears when it drops to 0 HP and is hostile toward creatures other than itself. So this little item will be covered in my wrapping up the campaign video. But man, oh man, is summoning a Tarrasque a tremendous deal. This Tarrasque will undoubtedly derail any campaign ever, and it's a blast. This thing will definitely be of use depending on how your players decide to use it. They could go ahead and decide to try and summon it right on top of O'Real. They could go ahead and just say screw it and threaten the world with it. They could do a lot of things. But what's really nice is while your players might know what a Tarrasque is, their characters probably don't. But thankfully, Professor Scant, the Professor Orb that your players could have picked up so long ago, and hopefully is with the party, has some great exposition that he can dump on the Tarrasque. And Professor Scant will actually happily say, oh yeah, you should summon that so I can observe it firsthand. That'd be excellent. This Scroll of the Tarrasque is such a big deal. There is actually a huge part of the end chapter that is written all about what happens if you summon the Tarrasque. And once again, we'll be going into those later. But needless to say, they basically go into exposition of, oh, if you summon it on O'Real's abode, then it rampages for a bit. If you summon it here, then it'll make its way out to the 10 towns, and it'll take months before it stops its endless tirade of damage, etc., etc. And let me tell you what, my players certainly summoned that Tarrasque right here in the city, and oh man, what a clown fiesta that was.